What's up, bookworms? This is Megan coming at you with another Cantina conversation. Today's episode features a chat with Elaine Neil Orr. We're talking about her book, Dancing Woman. That book is available now. Elaine was such a pleasure to talk to. I found it so fascinating that she was actually spent years, a significant portion of her life, living as an expat in Africa, which definitely inspired the story of main characters in her book. But either way, I'll let you guys get to it. Here is Elaine. So today we've got Elaine Neil Orr. We're talking about her book, Dancing Woman. That book just came out this week. It's available now. Elaine, thank you so much for joining me today. I discussed it with you. I'm still reading this book. I'm enjoying it so far. I'm enjoying the characters and I'm sympathizing with Isabel. I am sympathizing with Nick. They are going through it and I'm digging the situation that you've got her in and the journey that she's on. And I'm excited to go a little bit deeper today.
Thanks so much, Megan. I'm really happy to be here. This is how we reach readers, and authors are so grateful when someone shows an interest in their book and wants to help get it out into the world.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a fan of like most genres, and this one, I guess you could call it like, I don't know, contemporary or women's fiction or historical
yeah,
fiction.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all
It's a versatile. Yeah, so it's got a little bit of everything, a little bit for everyone. So before we get started, can you go into a summary of the book so that listeners can follow along if they haven't picked it up yet?
sure. I can especially maybe give us the premise and what leads off. So, the protagonist, the main character, our main character is Isabel, and she grew up in Virginia, in Richmond, and felt always a little bit of an outsider. One thing she had was going for her was she wanted to be an artist, and she'd gotten pretty good at it. But then was discouraged in college when a professor made a really awful comment about her painting. And in the meanwhile, she's also met a very attractive man who's just a bit older, and he's going to go on this exotic quest to West Africa and be a part of this new, I think John Kennedy instituted USAID, like the Peace Corps. So he's going to go there as an agricultural engineer. And he asks her to marry him and go along. And she does. It's both kind of running away from disappointment and running toward what she hopes will be a grand adventure. When they arrive, of course, her husband's very busy with his work, and she's in Nigeria, among a largely Muslim population. And she doesn't know the first thing about what to do next, right? However, one admirable trait of that Isabel has is that she's curious and she takes risks, sometimes to greater risk, and she begins to explore on her own and take every opportunity to learn the culture. Not too far into the novel, she also has, I should say, early on a miscarriage, which is a great disappointment and leads to some depression. But as the novel begins, her husband's away doing his work. She goes to a party being held, being given by a women's league organization, and a Nigerian British musician. He's has a British mother, a Nigerian father, is performing, and she becomes enamored of him, and she has a one night stand with him. That's her a little bit over the top self who goes too far, too quickly. And this could upend her whole life. And I don't think that's a plot spoiler because it happens right away.
Hmm.
And everything moves out from there. He reawakens her desire to be an artist. And she goes home after that experience, and in a kind of flurry of activity in her backyard, the next day, she unearths an ancient sculpture, which is a dancing woman. So Isabel is the dancing woman because she dances at the party. She uncovers this knock. It's called an NOK, which is an actual work of art, historically accurate, 2,000 years old. And so that knock, which speaks to her, and Bobby Tunde, the musician, and her good husband are all drawing her in different directions.
Yeah. In a nutshell, I know there's a lot to unpack it. We'll get into that because there's so much going on there, like, just with with the situation that you have her in because which I think so many readers could resonate with, at least especially probably women and more specifically grown women who have families or even like artists who might have had to, like Isabel, have had to step back from that part of themselves and step back from that passion and that the creative part of themselves. And life happens, right? I can't count how many times and how common it is for women to have to put aside, especially in the early 60s, let alone over ever. Like, pick a generation, and it happens to women a lot where they have to put their kind of their own dreams and ambitions aside for their to fulfill their role as a wife and a mother and kind of following in their spouse's footsteps into their dreams and ambitions. And just to dial it up a notch, where they're expats, right? So they're like, she's in like totally opposite Virginia culture. Like, totally opposite of what she's used to, and especially where it seems, from my perspective anyway, like I didn't live in the 60s, but where they have even more like restrictions and for women and gender roles. They have more specific like restrictions of the child marriage comes up. The women aren't allowed to drive, or like women, they don't typically drive, or it's not appropriate for women to walk about on their own. And so yeah, things like that where it's a little bit of a culture shock, and she's on her own aside from their house servant, their manservant Daniel. And she's, yeah, like she's in this position where it's just not only is she unfortunately have to fulfill that traditional role, but she's like thousands of miles away from everything she knows. And then, like you said, she explores a little bit too far, and but she's grappling with that pretty much like the whole time. Like she's just blaming herself, and the guilt is just always there, and she's thinking that everything is a punishment, everything that happens is a potential punishment for
Yeah,
her
right.
infidelity. It's yeah, and so I'm not condoning cheating whatsoever, but I just you put her in a position, or you create a character where you can't, at least for me, you can't help but like understand what she's dealing with. You understand how she can get away from herself a little bit.
Right, exactly. I think in the 60s, certainly. This is early 60s, right? This is Kennedy's just been elected. I don't even know what kind of birth control was available. I don't think the pill was, we didn't have the pill then. So
Mhm.
there was so much constriction, and a lot of that changed in the course of the 60s with the women's movement. But the idea that a woman could be a fulfilled artist and a mother and a wife, or at least a good mother and a good wife, right,
Mhm.
was almost unheard of. It wasn't really until the 60s with feminist criticism that we began to have women writers even in being taught in college, or really the 70s,
Yeah.
right, along with then some black writers like Toni Morrison, and we began to get women writers like that. So she's definitely of her age, but as you say, I'm not sure that much has changed. We have birth control, but that's a little bit under erasure. Um,
Yeah.
and abortion is talk about contemporary issues, right? And what women are going to be able to do and how they're going to live their
Yeah.
lives. So I think it's timely, even though it's an historical novel. I don't think I realized how
Yeah.
timely it would be when I started writing it 4 years ago. But it seems to me it could be almost any time, and that men don't really
Yeah.
have to choose between being an artist or having a career they find great joy in, and also having children. Right. And
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
I it's right there. Like, I with own my own except like my own self, and as an example, I went to college. I was very fortunate where I grew up in a middle class family, and I didn't if we did struggle, I never knew. I think my
Right.
mom was laid off for a hot second, like a few years, but my I never really noticed that we struggled. I think my it was I think I know we did, but I didn't know at the time.
Right.
So that even that's gonna speak to how fortunate, and I'm grateful for it too. And then my husband, he's an engineer. So he got into science and math, so he was gonna have a very well off job as soon as he found one, and he's been working with the same company for 14
Oh,
years.
okay.
And so yeah, and then he loves what he does, and I'm a little bit jealous because he's engaged, he likes the people he works with, and he's paid well, and I feel like that's almost like a trifecta. So it's very but I was always really career driven. I always saw myself as a working person
Mhm.
first. I never really thought I'd become a mom. And then once I became a mom, I was lucky that my job was flexible where I was able to, even before the pandemic, I was able to work from home part time.
Okay.
Um, but at the same time, I also noticed that my responsibilities and my role was a little bit split. Like I couldn't go all 100% in on my career. Any motivation or kind of momentum that I had was definitely stalled because I was the default parent. I'm still the default parent. My kids are 4 and 7
Oh,
now,
wow.
and I yeah, and, like, they're getting in school, like, my kid's in 2nd grade and preschool, so they're getting there. I'm waiting for that sweet spot where I get that free most of that free time back, especially with the 4-year-old. But it's I wouldn't necessarily trade it because 'cause we're still good, like, I still have my career. I guess it's just look at it as, "Oh, where would I have ended up? Where would I be if I didn't have kids or if I had kids a few years later?" It's one of those things that, like, why I sympathize with Isabel so much is because even though it wasn't like I'm not in a creative field, I wasn't, like, an artist or whatever like her, like, I work in marketing, and there's still
Yeah.
creativity, but they're like, I could work, like, almost anywhere, which I appreciate. But yeah, I could totally but you're absolutely right. There's so many parallels from not only gender roles, but like how administrations and laws can change. And they're still like, it's so stupid how we're still like fighting so many of the same battles. Like years later, oh, gross. Is it? Wait, 60s? Let me do the math 60 years later. So, but, yeah, but still, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call like
No,
you
no, no.
gross or anybody else's gross, but it's like, oh, I just remind myself, like, oh no, it's not 2000 anymore. It's 2025.
Exactly. I know. I
Yeah,
know. We're
yeah,
a
yeah.
quarter of the way through this century, right?
It's
Um,
crazy.
so picking up what you were saying about your career, and that you were saying it wasn't necessarily a creative career, but the thing is, when you can focus on something entirely, you can get into a zone. There's
Yes.
a kind of joy in what you're making, whether it's relationships or whether it's teaching or whether it's marketing. You're putting a plan together and you're making something happen, and that is creative.
Yeah.
And you're using your connections, and I think there's kind of joy and just a kind of, I don't know exactly the right word, but a sense of kind of living outside of time, like when you're working and you're just in the zone. Some
Yeah.
people feel this way working out, like athletically, running. What but I think people we need to have that kind of time to do best what we do best. And we need
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
time with children too, right? It's not like we
Oh,
don't need that
absolutely.
with children. It's just that women have been either having to do one and not the other, or do both and not quite have enough time really for that more creative, expressive part that also brings
Yeah.
more public recognition.
Oh,
Right? And
absolutely.
like you said,
Absolutely.
monetary reward. I'm not gonna make a lot of
Yeah.
money on my book, okay? I'm not gonna be a bestseller. I'm also a college professor, which happens to be a good job for writing because
Yeah. What do you teach
I
then?
teach literature. American
Okay, there you go. You just couldn't you had to get your outlet. No, but that's, like, still great, like, how I do this podcast and reading stuff and, like, the reviews and stuff. You find a way to do something outside of your normal obligations, like that tie into your career. This is like you and your little baby, just like this is me and my little
right,
baby. So, no, I think it's so important because that touches on another thing where Isabel's still trying to find a way, or she's her experiences, like you said with Bobby, he's kind of bringing that out in her, but then she's at war with herself because she's still she's like being pulled in different directions and
Right.
part of her that she's being called to. And then there's this handsome, charming musician who is feeding that other part of her that he's scratching that itch, or he's helping her to scratch that itch. He's like guiding her hand, like, here, scratch that itch kind of thing.
Right.
And
Right.
it's just, yeah, it was almost like I see Dancing Woman as like an acknowledgement, a wink, a little love letter to women in almost all generations of like time and time again. We have to make the choices. And yeah, I think in today's world, it's a little more common, or it's a little more, there's a more open conversation about the working mom. But then there's still, like you said, there's kind of other things like being challenged where that it's because of that. Like it's because we're seeing trends, and then certain people in power don't want that to continue, or they want to bring back some of those other like lifestyle patterns. And we don't have to get too political, we don't have to get on too many tangents, but with stuff like historical fiction, and when you talk about these themes, it's hard not to relate and notice the commonalities like of what today's generations are dealing with. And and it's like, I don't even, part of me is, I tell parents, like new parents, the only unsolicited advice is to take one day at a time.
Yeah.
Like it's when that's how I feel. Cause hopefully I don't think this is too spoilery, but Isabel does end up being a mother. If it hasn't been alluded to yet in our conversation, and then so she's obviously, she's grateful for it and she's happy about it. But then with the situation that her husband finds himself in, and then she's left on her own for a hot second. And I don't know, you threw it all at her. You had to kick it up a notch a few times. It was just like, you're like, no, I'm gonna dial it up a little bit. I'm gonna throw this at her. I'm gonna throw this at her. I'm gonna throw this at her. She's not just like a normal finds herself pregnant in this situation where she was unfaithful. And you had me for a second there too. I was worried. I was like, I didn't know what was gonna happen. And as the story was progressing, I'm like, "Oh, okay." Because I think that also could be just, that's another layer to that readers can also relate to, is if they found that some themselves of a loved one who just unexpected happens, and
Right.
then they're not prepared for it. And
Right.
because it does change everything. Even the aftermath of it changes just how do you go, like moving forward and stuff like that. Hopping off a little bit off of what you were saying, I'm curious about the research, because like, if you're in academia, you're used to like gathering up your resources, doing your research, either lesson planning or how you're going to talk about the literature, things like that. You're used to having to dig up all on that. Did you approach, like, how did your like normal career prepare you for this project? How did you approach the research? Because there's a lot, because it's historical fiction, you want to get things correctly.
Right.
And then was there anything fascinating or like surprising that you learned, stuff like that?
Quite a bit, but here's something you may not know, and certainly the listeners won't know yet unless they've already picked up the book. But I was born and grew up in Nigeria.
Mm,
So my parents were expats. And I was
okay.
growing up, but I grew up in the southern part of the country, which you might compare to
How long did you live there then? How long did
till I
you
was
grow up there?
16.
So that's a long time. Okay, so did you grow up with, I imagine you picked up a lot of the language, or did you have an accent? I'm so curious about that.
Well, you can hear my accent, but did I have a different one? No. So, unfortunately, and for many reasons, I did not learn a Nigerian language. There are like at least 300.
Oh god, I
Okay.
think I knew that. I think I knew there was a
There are a
lot.
lot.
I think I
Now,
knew there
there
was a
are
lot.
dominant
Yes.
ones. And in the novel, Isabel does begin to learn Hausa. She learns quite a bit, actually, by the time you get to the end, so that she can have a
Yeah.
conversation with the chief of the town, who's called the Sarki, and with some of the women she befriends or who befriend her.
Mhm.
But I did grow up in Nigeria, but I was in the southern part of the country, which is largely Christian. The
Okay.
northern part of the country, which is where this novel is set, is largely Muslim. So that's where I learned a lot.
Okay.
Okay, I didn't really know much about Ramadan. I didn't know about children going door to door and getting candies. I didn't know about goats being slaughtered, run through the street, and then having their necks slit and the blood running out in the street. So those are things I learned. I didn't know much about planting a forest of trees, some of the engineering things. I did already know about the war because there's a civil war that breaks out. It's about to break out in
Yeah.
the country at the end of the novel. I knew that because I lived there then. I was there during that war. But I've written a memoir about growing up in Nigeria called Gods of Noonday, A White Girl's African Life. And so I did
Okay.
a lot of,
I love that ti I love that title.
yeah,
Because 'cause you're just you're embracing it, you're owning it, you're yeah, I this is my experience as a yeah, exactly.
yeah. But being a white American girl, grew up I grew up both as a Nigerian white girl and as a American white girl. So,
Mhm.
according to Nigerian thought, traditional thought, if you're born in Nigeria, you are a Nigerian. Now, that would not get me a visa,
Mm,
okay, or citizenship. It's a traditional idea. So
sure,
if I
yeah.
go back to Nigeria and present my visa, the person at the gate will say, "Welcome home." They'll see you're born
Oh,
here, okay. But I lived pretty much in an expat community. So I
yeah.
didn't go to school with
Okay, yeah.
Nigerian kids. They were on a British school system. I was in an
Okay.
American school system. So what I'm aware of, especially as I wrote that memoir, what I became aware of was just how much the local culture affected me, like the music, the drumming at night, the environment, the rain, the rivers and animals, and the cloth and the marketplace, and all of those things that I hope are so vivid for you when you're reading. The
Yeah.
smells, right? What it's like to have Christmas in an arid, hot environment. That's what we do. That's
Yeah.
how I grew up. It's supposed to be hot. Go to the river on Christmas Day.
So how did you, like, tap into those old memories or when you were either writing your memoir and even this story, like, turning it into a
It
fiction
was
piece?
writing the memoir was time travel. I started uncovering old pictures, talking with my parents, talking with my older sister, people I grew up with, and I began to dream it. I had a semester off, and that was all I was doing. And this was before we had Facebook and everything.
Sure,
So
yeah, yeah.
I was hardly even doing email. I could just go so deep. And my one son was grown and in college. So for about 7 months, I just went so deep. And I think that all your memories are there. You just have to access them. You have to
Yeah,
give yourself time to remember. Yeah.
yeah. That's I just think that's so fascinating because I can't imagine, like, decades later how you're like, "Okay, I think I'm ready to get into this," and then you have to find a way to just open trigger open it, and because I imagine that was just such a fascinating just ama you don't know anything else, from, like, ages 0 from birth to 16, right? But I imagine so many of your core memories came from
Core
your
mem
time there.
Absolutely. All my sensory core memories are from Nigeria. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's amazing.
it's interesting. You just made me think of something. We were talking about this novel could happen. It could happen for a woman in her 40s. So that's when this happened for me, not the affair part, but excuse me.
I won't tell
Okay,
anybody. We can edit it out.
I had written my two scholarly books. I'd been promoted to full professor, and I was suddenly free to do what I wanted to do. And then I had the time to do it. And the idea of opening a box and going into those photographs and letters and
Mm,
memorabilia and all kinds of things that I had saved. Yeah, it was really to get into something that's deeper in the novel. It was really a spiritual experience. It was like diving
mm.
deep into my soul. And it might sound a little bit like this is just a pot boiler, my novel about this woman and all the trouble she gets into. But we all get into so much trouble. Life is trouble, right? And some of it we create, and some of it comes to us, and some of it comes to us really fast. The question is what you do with it. And
Yeah.
what Bobby Tunde does is he encourages Isabel to go on this deep dive. Right. He
Yeah.
refers to her underground spirituality, and she really latches onto that.
Yeah.
Right. She
Yeah.
wants to go, she wants to find her soul self. And there's so many ways to do that, but that's what I did writing that memoir. Is I really went back
Yeah.
and I had come to the US and just completely become an American. And
So then coming to America, coming back to your parents' home was a bit of a culture shock for
oh,
you or no?
absolutely. No, I still
Yeah.
feel out of step. I cannot play Trivial Pursuit. I only know we would come home for brief furloughs every fourth year. And so I remember Gilligan's Island because that was out the year we were here
I
when I
l
was in
I love
fifth
that.
grade. I don't know another TV show till I'm in the ninth grade. Yeah,
So hold on, did you come back in the '80s then or
no,
the
70s.
okay.
Yeah,
Just trying to, like, add some context
yeah,
to your
yeah.
experience because my parents were born in the '50s, and so in the '70s they didn't meet until the '80s, but in the '70s, I think they were still, like, young and teenagers.
Right.
So but yeah, so, like, what was, like, the biggest moment, like, that you remember coming back or not coming back, just coming here for the new part of your life in the '70s?
Yeah, really a moment. I think I was too much in shock for quite a while. But what I first of all, I had not really experienced racism as a kid. I was in a Georgia high school in Decatur, Georgia in the ninth grade. I had never seen black and white people suspicious of one another or
Oh,
not
wow.
intermingle. In Nigeria, there are ethnic groups and they are sometimes at odds with one another, like in the
Sure.
novel, but it's not white and black. And when Nigerians come to the US, they will tell you, "Oh, I didn't know I was black," because they're Nigerian.
Yeah,
They're not
okay.
black.
Yeah.
Now, I
And
love
unfortunately, a lot of people here, they just see black and white. They don't see
they
from
yeah,
different countries or tribes from
yeah,
Africa,
they
yeah.
saw me as an American. And if
Yeah,
I and an African American friend traveled to Nigeria together in 2000, I think, they saw us as the same Americans. He was not, in
yeah,
fact, and he said this to me, so I hope that you'll believe me. He said, "They are more," this was a colleague who's a man, "they feel closer to you because you were born here than they do to me because we have the
yeah,
skin tone that's similar." So the way we see race in the US is not universal.
yeah,
It's really
yeah,
not. Nigerians aren't black.
yeah.
It's
They're
just
they're
they're
Nigerians. Yeah,
Nigerians. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So that shocked me. I just had no preparation for that. And then the other thing I didn't know how to deal with was kind of girl culture. Like, uh, people were pretty friendly with me, which was helpful. I had girlfriends pretty
yeah.
quickly, but I didn't understand why we got in the car and drove around at night. Pizza store or just drove around looking for boys. That would just never.
You're
And
Yeah, I could how you were like, "Is this what you
what are we
guys
doing
are
here?
going for?" Yeah, 'cause what would you have been used to
I would have
doing,
been
like,
used to
as a young
get the expat community. So we would gather and have parties, right? The
Yeah.
young people, the kids, or high schoolers, or whatever we were, have a dance. Even though my parents were Southern Baptist, we did. And so we had a small community, and we were not driving cars in cities in Nigeria. It was kind of more a smaller enclave. Yeah.
Okay.
We had been listening to American pop music, however, in Nigeria. We listened to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones.
I was gonna say, like, I feel like the Beatles were just
They were
global,
global,
so
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's just, like, the beauty of it, it's like music can still you can find connection with yeah,
yeah,
I love that, I love that. 'Cause I'm like I at the end of the day, I feel like if someone asked me like, "Oh, who's your favorite musician or your favorite band?" I'm like, I fell in love with the Beatles as a teenager, and I'm still like if the Beatles start playing, I can be so comfortable with, like, hours of songs,
Yes,
and
and when I
it
when I hear a Beatles song, if it came out, all of them came out while I was in Nigeria. So when
Mhm.
I hear them, I can see exactly where I was on the soccer field when I first heard it, or exactly where I was under that silk cotton tree. It takes
Oh my
me to
gosh.
where I first heard it. It doesn't take
Oh,
me
that's
anywhere
amazing.
in the US. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's what we're like what kind of, like, parts of American culture were, like, more popular not popular, but were well known in
Yeah.
Nigeria that kinda helped you be a little bit more familiar when you went to the US?
This was an era when we still had magazines, and we got Newsweek and Time, but we also got I got some American teen magazines in Nigeria,
Okay.
17, and I'm trying to think of some others that would get my cousins would send to me, and so I could see what I should look like. Oh,
Oh, no.
right. I need to get some white lipstick, and of course, I look terrible in white lipstick, but I need to be really skinny and wear
Mm,
very short dresses, and we were following those trends, and Nigerian girls did
okay.
too. And American
Okay.
film came to Nigeria, and now Nigeria has beyond besides the US, Nigeria has the second, I don't know, highest level of movie production in the world.
Wow.
Nollywood. Yeah,
I didn't know
I
that.
know. So they
Yeah.
really have imbibed American culture.
That's that obviously, I imagine that's largely in part to expatriatism and the projects that and the organizations that had initiatives in parts of
Exactly,
those countries,
exactly.
but
It's a lot of information was carried, a lot of popular culture, and then at first, many Nigerians wanted to go to Britain to get higher education, but then they started coming to the
mm,
US, and they would spend
okay,
4 to
yeah.
6 years here, and so when they went home, they'd become, in lots of ways, Americanized. Yeah,
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I could totally see that. I could that happens so much though. It's not like just exclusive to Africa. It's
no,
like
exactly,
so many that's what the whole idea is like with America. It's been for decades
right.
where people are coming here, going back,
All
coming here,
right,
going
now we have
back.
some I don't know when so many Vietnamese students began coming, right? Or when I don't know, so many Indian students from the country of India.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I have so many international students now. We're getting students from Nigeria in our MFA in writing program.
Do you get excited?
Yeah,
Are you like,
yeah,
oh, and then like to see how maybe different things are with
exactly,
them
exactly.
then
Yeah,
yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I love that. I just think it's so fascinating how like just generations have traveled and why they're traveling, like why they and it's not just like people coming to the US, it's people like war-torn countries going to Europe, like you said, are going for education or for opportunities, like refugees, and not even, or even this, and from World War II, there are Germans going to South America,
right,
like Chile and Argentina. Like it's just whenever I've traveled, when I was in tagging along my husband's work trip to Germany, I was like doing like tours, like touristy stuff while he was at work, and I remember I went on a tour and there was a man, like another man, he was like my age at the time, he was from Chile and he was going on the tour because we went to the Dachau concentration camp and he had no idea what happened. He just knew that his grandparents were from Germany and they escaped the war. That's all he knew. And so he had no idea. So when we were there and we were looking at the just like walking through the exhibit part of it cuz it was like we were there like at the camp and it was crazy how it was I could sense the energy shift. Like it was just like such a somber I could just I don't know, I can't explain it. I could just feel it. It was like once you were on the grounds, it was like you could tell there was a level of respect there you could tell something happened here you can tell like it and then we went through the exhibit part of it through the actual buildings and then we were also there during high school field trip where they're totally used to it and so they didn't feel that same thing they were expecting it they knew oh this is part of like field trip normal field trip curriculum and German curriculum like German youth they knew it they knew the history they weren't no, they weren't nobody was trying to hide anything, and even when I remember I, like if you a lot it was interesting and funny that our tour guides were English. They were from England because at the time Germany had a really good economy, and so they were able a lot of English people were finding jobs in Germany. And so they were like anytime you mention like World War II or Hitler or anything to like a German, they froze a little. They were like, "Oh," like they it was a sore subject. They was like touchy for them. And so it was I thought it was also so interesting. Here I am with a man from Chile and he's just visiting Germany and he's curious. He's going on this tour because he's curious about like where his grandparents came from and why he essentially I think he's like at least half German and he grew up in Chile. He doesn't I don't think he knew German, but he, like, knew Spanish and
Oh,
stuff. But then he, like, went and then he was like, "I'm here with him," and he's almost not, like, culture shock, but he's oh my god. He was just, "Holy shit." And then, juxtapose that to, like, a group of teenage kids who they're just approaching it like they were going to the I'm in Chicago area. They're going to a museum of science and industry, or they're going to, like, whatever, like, any normal field trip, and it was so I thought it was so interesting, and that, like, helped open my eyes to, like, the perspective of an American. I was like, "Oh, there's so it's like the America is not, like, the central stop."
no, exactly.
Not the central focus of yes, globally, people follow us, like, the countries follow us, and we are a global power, like, for many reasons, but generations and decades, like, it's just there's so many like migrations
Right,
and traveling and things like that. And I think that's just why I'm like when some Americans can just be so self-centered or individualistic,
mhm.
and I think that's just our
We're
culture.
isolated globally in the sense that we're on this continent with only 2 other countries, and
Yeah,
and we're separated by
and then our borders are so like, oh, like tight
and
and
then yes, and
like
then there's an ocean on either side. If
yeah,
you're in Portugal, you drive into Spain, you drive into France, you could spend a week and drive to almost every European country.
a few hours in another
Exactly.
country. We're a few I'm still in Illinois.
Yeah,
Like I
exactly.
a few you have to some people have to drive 8 hours to get out of Texas. Like it's yeah.
So one of the
And
things that
I think that's also part of it. Like in America, we can live whatever weather we prefer. We can still
exactly.
stay in America.
One of the things
It's why
that I think that I hope people experience when they read one of my books is, and this one especially, is what it's like when the U.S. is not the center of the world.
yeah,
We're living. This woman is an American, but she's living somewhere else where what's happening is Ramadan, or what's happening is clashes between local groups, or she's being surprised that she's got to consult with this town chief and she thinks he's
yeah.
backwards and maybe doesn't understand it much, but when she gives him an American camera he knows exactly how to use it. And he so she doesn't understand much of what's going on. She has to learn it. She has to reorient herself. She has to begin to see, okay, I'm in this world. Yeah, and yeah, I think as Americans, we really do think we're the center of the not just of the globe, but the universe.
I know. And it's I've and I'm speaking for myself because I know there's still like a lot of grown ass adults who only care about America. Like it's but yeah, I can't I think it's so my mom, she's fully Mexican. I have family who still live in Mexico.
Oh,
Like they have
no,
property. Yeah, so they have property on both sides of the border. And so I grew up like just that was
yeah,
normal for me or
I
I just
love
grew up.
that.
Yeah.
You're
And I
kind of
love it.
you're hybrid.
I I
Yeah,
my dad's Irish, so I look like I just hopped off the boat. So but that was the whole thing growing up. It was like I looked so much like my dad, but then the older I got, it's like, oh no, I'm the white version of my mom. Because you look at my mom, she could spend one day out in the sun in the summer and she stays dark all year long. Like we tease her about it. That the heat doesn't phase her. She just and it's but she was very Americanized because my grandmother was like, no, like we speak
right,
English because they grew up in a household where it was I think my uncle, like, if he spoke Spanish, he got
beat up.
Yeah.
He spoke English, he got beat up. So it was like
Wow.
it was just for survival, and that's so common with families. It's not just coming like immigrants or whatever families from Mexico or second, third generation, whatever. It's people coming from any other countries. Like they
Right.
say, no, we're Americans, we're fitting in, and then they have to struggle with that. Oh, wait, we still want to value our culture, but only in the house. No, we're gonna survive. You're American. You're speaking English, and because I'm like, if my mom was fluent, and if me and my brother and my sister were fluent, it was like, who knows where our paths would have led us. But it's also that allows me to just understand. I had no control over what side of the border I was born
Oh,
on. So I have, I don't, and we're gonna go off on a tangent, but it's I understand the concern for immigration, but it's so good for our economy. It's so important. We've been relying on immigration for decades. I agree it needs to be regulated. I totally agree. I'm not against that. And obviously criminals should be dealt with, but it's like we've got natural born US citizens who are
exactly.
criminals too. It's no, they're not, that's not all they're here for. Like you got go to go to any metropolitan area, you find like US citizens who are also committing crime. You've got elites, social circles, millionaires committing blue collar, what do they call it? Blue crime,
Right.
white collar crime. I forget. It's so yeah, that's why I'm like so thankful, and it's given me like an understanding, and also where I approach life with I understand that I don't understand everything. I don't know everything. I don't that's my perspective, and I know my life. I know my experience. I don't know your experience, but I'm very interested in it. So that's why I think it's so fascinating that we're born in Nigeria and you grew up in Nigeria and you didn't even come to America until you were already a teenager, like until you were old enough to
Yeah, I did
drive.
come. We would come
Uh,
for visits, but I
okay. So it wasn't
this was
okay.
a
So
foreign
you were
country.
gonna say if you came here like
No, the U.S. was a foreign country, and Nigeria was home.
yes. Yeah. It's why did you was there a reason? Oh, because you when you came, you were in Georgia, you were in the South. Because I'm like, I was curious why you had Isabel from
Yeah,
Virginia.
I was just trying to stretch my, I don't know, my representation. I wrote a novel about characters in Georgia. My primary characters were from Georgia. And then I wrote a novel where the primary characters were from North Carolina. I guess I'm going north. I don't know. So then I went to Virginia. I thought I still wanted the novel to be potentially classified as Southern. So I didn't want to have them from Chicago plus I don't know anything about basically.
Any of
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Insofar as I'm an American, I'm a Southerner because I've always lived in the American South. And I think Richmond's a fascinating city, and I'd been there. And when I learned about the working class background that I could give her and situate her there in downtown Richmond, that excited me. And it just seemed, yeah, Tennessee didn't seem quite right. I don't know. Yeah.
I know. I was just curious because, like, a lot of authors they'll draw upon what they're familiar with, and so I just was curious as, oh, why Virginia or whatever, because but it was still like no matter where, still it's gonna be different. It's gonna be significantly, drastically different than growing up in Nigeria, another country across the sea. Yeah, but yeah, I just get curious because I've only driven through the South, and we did take a vacation in Myrtle Beach, but that's the only experiences that we have. But I just remember, oh, and then we went to, oh, I've been in Nashville because my brother-in-law and his wife lived there. But there was one thing, oh, Gatlinburg for the smokes
Oh,
my husband and I
yeah.
did spend, and I loved it. But I was also like, when we went to Gatlinburg, some of the shops were still selling Confederate flags, and I'm like, are you serious?
I, that's,
But that was also, like, very telling for
yeah,
me. Oh, because 'cause I'm like, okay, I grew up in Chicago, it's so mixed, and we're also it's so populated with,
right.
diverse backgrounds, and but then it's you just travel, what, like, maybe 1,000, few hundred miles, and it's just there are people still down there. It's just I think I was speaking to an author who she was saying the same sentiment, but it's because she was Indian, and her parents were from India, and then she went inside the store owned by Indian people, and they were selling Confederate flags, and she was like, what the fuck? But then it was just like them kind of catering to the locals, and it's I just think it was like it's like they don't I don't know. My opinion is like they're not bothered at being called racist, or they don't like to admit loss, or at least as far as I'm familiar with the history of it. But I'm just like, I don't it was just like, it's so surprising to me. I'm like, I'm get over it. There's so many more serious things to worry about than racism in itself as a whole thing. It's that's why I think I was so fascinated by your background of how you differentiate and how different it is for Nigerians to come here, and it's a shock for them to realize, oh, I'm just seen as black. I'm not seen as Nigerian. And then, but then when you come here, you're seen as American, even though you go there, you go back, and you're like, oh, welcome home. You're Nigerian. That's Wait, did you have to get another citizenship when you came here, or were you already dual citizenship because of your
Because my
parents?
parents, yeah, I
Yeah.
was
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
automatically an American.
Okay, God, it's so fascinating. I don't know. I'm like picking your life. I'm like picking your brain, picking your life.
Oh,
I want to be respectful of our time. I'm just going to ask a few more questions. Thank you for letting me bombard you about your experiences and how it contributed to this book. So, okay, what were the most challenging parts to write? What were the most enjoyable parts to write?
oh, let's see. Oh man, that's hard. One thing that was challenging was writing all the painting scenes because I go to real lengths in the novel to describe how she does watercolor. Watercolor
Yeah,
is a very specific craft. It's not like just putting a
it's
pigment
hard.
on a canvas and then you can change it or move it or paint over it or whatever. It's very demanding. It's like using ink. You put it down and you can't get it up and you can't paint over,
Yeah,
and you can build up with washes, but I wanted it to be extremely authentic, and I wanted us to take her seriously as an artist and to see that she has the vocabulary for the craft. She
yeah.
wouldn't think, oh, I'm just going to put some brown here. She would think, I'm going to use some burnt umber. So I had to hire someone who did watercolor. I have done some watercolor, but I had to hire
I was
someone.
gonna say you're a brave woman. Like, I have never done watercolor. I don't even want to touch it. My mom has, because she's retired, so she was like taking a couple classes.
It's
And
very
I'm like, I
hard.
can't.
Very
It's
hard.
hard.
That was probably the hardest part. The easiest parts are describing landscape, atmosphere, weather. I just know that like I lived 10 lives there. I just know it. And I love to conjure it. It's an indulgence. So that's always makes me happy is to throw in the frangipani leaves and or the scent of the frangipani flower and the bougainvillea and the harmattan, which is when the dust comes down from the Sahara, or the sound of the rains, all of that. I can do that blindfolded.
I love because I that was one of my. I think one of the definitely the one things I noticed was that, like, I don't know, like lyrical, but like very nature. Like, you a lot of descriptive based on the nature of it. So I could definitely tell that's where you felt
Yeah,
comfortable, of how you were describing your scenes and how Isabel was describing what she was seeing, her surroundings. And I thought that was, yeah, there's definitely something there about helping the reader just immerse themselves in the more, you got to find that sweet spot. You got to find that moment to just like click. And when it comes natural to you, when it's easy to you, it definitely shows, versus when it's, if you're struggling with it,
right.
that will also yeah. Yeah, it was like you say you were struggling with the watercolor parts, but I remember, like, when you were, I know that, I think I've heard that hands are extremely hard
Mhm.
to draw, and then when you had Isabel paint Amina, I think her name, Amina's hands, she was like, "Oh, I just wanna paint your hands," and then I was like, she was like, "Okay." And it was like, she was hard to read. She was like, "Okay, like, I'll do it." But I thought that was such an intimate scene, because not only, because I think I, like, as a reader, I have a background understanding of how difficult it is, but also it was like you had to get in there. You had to get in there and use that language and use that moment to bring out, just as you said, like, the challenging parts of describing it
Yeah.
and describing her process and her motions and just, oh, the
Right.
nails and making sure she got that right or letting parts dry before she started another part, and
Exactly.
that's yeah, like, I definitely caught that, and I definitely there were certain moments, like, that definitely was, like, zoned in. It was easy for me to zone in on it, and I definitely noticed it, but it helped, like, it slows the story down, but it also takes the reader into a place where they can just hone in on it, like, they can just appreciate it if that's what they're looking for, and it's just I just remember from my experience, I was just, like, just getting into it, and I was
Well,
like it's hard for me to articulate because I was just like, "Oh, wait, she's drawing hands, she's painting hands?" Like, she chose specifically hands? Like, what she I don't know, I don't you can't tell. I like going to those painting
oh,
classes.
yeah, are those yours? How
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, like the sip and
That's
paint
so
or
great.
whatever, and I've got there's so many around the whole house, like, of because I just and I tell people all the time, I'm like, "I have too many paintings around the house, I'm running out of space, but I will always be down because it's just even if I'm not very good at it, it's just like they're
That's it, it's that
um
focus, getting lost in it, and even though there's a lot of drama in my novel, I think it's character driven. And
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
really get into Isabel's head and her interior. That's the real level of drama is the interior self. We know that what because most of our own struggle is happening inside of us. We're not blurting out to the world that we're sad this
No.
morning, depressed this morning, challenged, happy, joyful,
Yeah.
scared. We're
Yeah.
living it interiorly. And so I think and yeah, and then there's drama in our lives too. If a child gets really ill and we're afraid they might die, or we have a car accident. Things happen that are very dramatic. And but what I'm after when I write is the characters and how they go through some transformation and
Yeah.
come out on the other side. I think that's what the traditional definition of the hero or heroine is that's the character who has to change, can't
Yeah.
remain static, right? And all of that really happens inside.
Yeah, and that's what you're doing with Isabel is she's definitely at war with herself. She's definitely feeling that conflict. She's definitely being pulled into different directions and she's struggling because she doesn't I don't get the sense that she wants to give up her central I don't know, what's the nuclear family
Right.
sense that she wants to give that
Yeah.
up because she's very, like, responsible, she's very, "No, I'm in it, this is my family, I, like, love my husband." She's trying even though she doesn't feel that passion for her husband for a hot second, like, she knows that her husband's different and she's putting in the work to try to be like there's a whole plot there's a whole plot line of a storyline of, her acknowledging that and then her trying to find that back, and it's I totally respect her for that, and it's yeah, it's exactly it's like there's that part of her that she's not doesn't wanna separate herself, but that makes her more at war with herself
Right.
because she can't ignore this part, but she's not mad at her obligations. She's what yeah. So one last question before we head out here. What advice sorry, I'm gonna throw this at you. What advice do you have for Isabel? What advice do you have for Nick?
Oh dear. I think that my advice for both of them is the same. And that's what is there's a kind of saying, take the long view. We make a lot of decisions, I think, especially maybe in our 20s, but maybe anytime. Some people in their 40s because they have a life crisis or something. But we get really caught up in something and think we have to make a decision right now, or we have to move in some direction right now. But really, and I think in the US, I think Americans are all about going fast. I think that we can just slow down sometimes and breathe and think, where do I want to be in a decade or 20 years? And what do I want to stick with so that I can get there? And yeah, sometimes we need radical changes in our lives and we make them. But I think I would say take the long view. But that's not pat. That doesn't mean I'm saying y'all just stay married and have a traditional marriage. Believe me, that is not what I'm saying. This is a very feminist novel. It's really about Isabel claiming her right again to her soul and to her destiny, right? And if she was running away to marry Nick and go to Nigeria, then she's not going to find her destiny by continuing to run away. She does have to confront, she does have to grapple, and she does have to make decisions. But yeah, I'd say take the long view. I'd say that to everybody, actually.
I was gonna say that's solid
Oh,
advice for all fictional and non-fictional people. Like that's like I'll stick that in my pocket, just keep the long view, keep the big picture in
right.
mind, the long game.
Yeah.
Just keep it's like at the end of the day, it's what you might be mad about or upset about or depressed about today might not remember it in a month or
No,
so.
I've sometimes gone back and read my journal, and I was really sad or depressed or lonely or angry. And I'm like, what was going on? I don't even remember. Or my husband and I'll have a fight. And 2 weeks later, we'll say, what was that we got upset about? And we can't remember.
And no, I'm like I'm gonna be 38 soon and I go to therapy and even then when I try to talk about things that I know, like moments that were moments for me, I will straight up tell my therapist, I don't even remember what the fight was about. I just remember that it fucked me up. It's like, yeah, yeah. And it's so true. And that's so normal. And it's so puts things into perspective because it's whatever you think is like the end of the world. It's like a year from now, you won't even remember
Yeah,
it. You won't even remember it unless it's like such a huge life-changing moment, a loss or something like that. It's like these fights, it's you handle that as it comes along and then you look at the big picture though. Like you look at the big picture. But it's also is this going to make or break
right.
things? Is this really that serious? Is it really that it's exactly. So yes, very solid advice to I was going to say fictional characters and real
Yeah.
people, absolutely.
On the cover, to,
Oh, I haven't so wait, I have my hat
it's unfortunately it's got a sticker on it, and this is not even the final copy. This is an ARC, but it's such a beautiful book.
I see the copy that I have is an ARC, it doesn't have the sticker on it,
Yeah, well,
but
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Their book's so much nicer without the sticker. I just wanted
I
everyone to
know
see
it.
it with that red bird, and yeah, it's such a beautiful book. I'm gonna have to go because I have dinner plans.
Oh, no, absolutely, thank you so much for your time, I
Oh,
need to
it's
go
so
too.
nice. I feel like you're an old friend.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you feel so comfortable with me. And Elaine Neil Orr, this was such a comfortable conversation. Thank you for your
Thank
time and your
you.
flexibility and your authenticity and for sharing your life and your experiences that maybe you had to tap into. And Dancing Woman, that's available now. I recommend it to people who are into historical fiction, women's fiction. It's got anybody who wants to read about a little messy journey with the backdrop of something a little bit bigger, things like that. But thank you. And wherever we can find you online and on social media, I'll make sure to include the links in the show notes and all that good stuff.
Okay,
And if
great.
and when you are writing or working on another project, feel free to reach out. I'd love to chat with you
Oh,
again.
thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And there you go. That was Elaine Neil Orr talking about her book, A Dancing Woman. That book is available now. Check out the show notes where you can find links to purchase the book and where to find Elaine online and on social media. Rate, review, subscribe. Find Cantina Book Club on your favorite social media, YouTube, podcast player, wherever you are looking for recommendations or author interviews. Check out cantinabookclub.com if you ever need more recommendations. I'm always writing reviews on all sorts of genres. And just a friendly reminder that if you do like an author or their work, go ahead and hop on over to Amazon and Goodreads if you can and give them a rating and review. It really does help them out, along with, of course, pre-orders and just ordering their books, requesting them for your bookstores and libraries, all that good stuff. And as always, thank you guys so much for listening.